Hi, I'm Robin Gully.
I'm John Justin.
And we are here to give your council recap for tonight, March 13th, 2023.
Yep, and thanks to Councilperson Arman for covering me in my stead last time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great. But really glad to have John back this time. We are going to start with the open council work session. So the first thing that we did was look at applicants for Parks and Rec Committee, Environmental Committee, and planning.
Yep.
Yes. So we had 4 great applicants, and we're really thankful to them for stepping up and wanting to serve the city. They all brought really different things to the process. So
absolutely,
we had folks of different ages and folks who had sort of different perspectives on the city. If you want to check out their interviews, you can go to the Open Council work session video on Town Square Television, or you can click to it right from our city agendas and see what they had to say about themselves and why they wanted to be on these committees and commissions. But I just want to make a quick plug that we're very committed to seeing different perspectives on these committees and commissions, especially over the next 2 years. We just did our strategic planning, and it was something that we specifically talked about, making sure that we're having different perspectives represented on our committees and commissions. So that means people of color, that means renters, that means people who live in different parts of the city. So if you have been thinking about applying to a committee or commission, even if you think like, oh, I just don't know enough yet, we want your perspective and we want your voice represented on these committees and commissions. And we have a lot of spots, and right now we just filled the spots that we had available, but these spots come open like every few months, and we see applicants. So we'd love it if you would consider applying.
Yeah. And thank you to everybody who may have applied. I know that we had a lot of planning commission applicants that may not have gotten through on this round. That doesn't mean you're not in the hopper for next time. Keep in there. We appreciate it, and we're always so excited that we get as many applications as we do. I think that's a good sign.
We're really lucky to have a very engaged city, so
yes.
Keep it up.
Yes.
And come and join us when you're ready. Next, we talked about this.
Oh, actually, one other thing quickly that I forgot. And actually, there will be one more planning spot that's filled, and the mayor who does the nominations for that, went back and is going to wait and try to find an additional Ward 2 person to put on planning to try and get closer to the ward balance that we want. So, hi Ward 2, if you have applications in, that may still be in process with the mayor looking at the applications that are in, and thanks again. We will see, I think in the next meeting, we'll probably see somebody move forward for that.
And I especially want to lift up that we have some new apartment buildings in Ward 2, so some of the folks who live in those buildings might not know that they live in Ward 2. So let me just tell you, if you live on the north central part of West St. Paul, you're most likely in Ward 2. So we are west of Robert Street, east of, oh gosh, it changed. It used to be Charlton.
It's slightly more complicated. There's an interactive ward map on our site that's current. Yeah, that's the best way to look. Or you can just call us. We can tell you by looking up your address. And the other thing I wanted to mention that follows into that is we did appoint somebody today that has only lived in the city for 0.5 years.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, well, I've only lived here for a year or only lived here for 2 years. That is not disqualifying. There's no requirement for long-term residency, so don't let that talk you out of it either. If you're somebody who's new but paying attention and excited about stuff, apply. We don't discount applications by how long you've lived here. I know it's on the form, it's informational. I don't think it's ever been brought up as like, well, that isn't long enough, because we don't measure things that way. So keep that in mind too.
In fact, and I know we're spending too much time on this, but I do want to say that if you are new to the city, you may have a fresh perspective, which is really useful.
Absolutely.
So, coming in with like new eyes and being able to say, oh, I really missed this from this last city that I lived in, or it was so cool the way this other city did this, that's valuable. And so please don't let that be a reason that you don't apply to committees and commissions. It's a great way to learn about the city and to get more involved and get your hands dirty in some of the things that make our city go.
Yep, absolutely.
So the next thing we talked about was the Smith-Dodd overlay. So I don't know, do you want to try to take this one?
This was maybe a slightly confusing conversation because it was sparked by the fact that there's a unnamed possible development thing. Nothing crazy major that's like secretive or anything like that. But of how we have the Smith-Dodd overlay, which is when we kind of redesigned it to try and encourage that sort of neighborhood feel, moving buildings up, diminishing parking, having more of that pedestrian-oriented stuff, because we really feel that Smith-Dodd could be a really cool thing. And it kind of comes down into 40 acres over by me. There's a couple other nodes that come off of there. There's an applicant who's trying to do something, somebody that's there right now, and we can't talk about it because it didn't get past staff, because by the letter of the Smith-Dodd overlay, it would fall outside of what we can do. I think sometimes you get to the answer by working through it at the table, and I think what happened is we got to the point of talking about maybe we need to look at the parking minimums. Don't worry, they're not going up, but possibly lowering the parking minimums to make this work in that zone, because without it having to be undoing the Smith-Dodd. We're really committed to this idea we have for Smith-Dodd overlay, so we don't want to cut down on that to just change for one business, but in the grand scheme of things, we've had an intention to keep trying to lower parking minimums. It's been kind of a move we've been making for the 4 years I've been here, and we continue to move forward. So it's a good time to bring that up again, and it's probably enough time that we haven't seen anything blow up from lack of parking. It's time to maybe go, hey, let's pull the parking minimums down again. We're trying to, you kind of do tests to hit the point where you start to see the edge of not trouble, but maybe some areas of concern. And we haven't hit that yet. We haven't had any problems with lowering our minimums. We lowered them significantly. So I think this will move forward with an examination of like, hey, do we take the next incremental step? And again, test the waters, see how it goes. So I think that might be the result of this. So it starts as a conversation with Smith-Dodd. It might end up with a continuation of our conversation about parking minimums, and changing them from when we were a very car-focused, Robert Street-centric sort of idea of where our businesses were to where we're looking now, and where we're looking at these neighborhoods and pocket businesses and all the things that I love about cities. So we're getting there. So
yeah, and because this conversation started in a different place, I just want to say, so an overlay is basically like, we're trying to change we're trying to change some things about the neighborhood. And so in the Smith-Dodd neighborhood, so where Oxendales is, where Foodsmith is, we are working to do some things that we've actually been working on in other parts of the city for quite a while, in line with our 2040 comprehensive plan, like moving businesses up much closer to the street, putting parking in the back, making them more pedestrian friendly, creating big sidewalks. And so the overlay is on top of the district, it's sort of, think of it as like laying a layer on top of a map, like a transparency on top of a map, where you say, okay, we're gonna do something different in this particular area. And so I I think you'll see if you watch the council meeting, I got a little bit weirded out by the fact that we were talking about this thing, but when we got to talking about parking minimums, I was like, oh yes, this is 100% what we want. We are committed to moving toward a more bike and pedestrian friendly city.
And overlays are a good way, you don't want to have 14 different business districts. So you have larger zoning areas that you apply over a whole city. It avoids spot zoning, which is never good, and all that stuff. An overlay allows us to take a look at something that might all be within one or two sorts of residential and business districts, and say, this area, however, has a unique opportunity or unique challenges. And so if we do an overlay, we maintain our zoning, we don't change it for the whole city, because there are places where it doesn't make sense. But we're also not rezoning that and creating a new zoning thing, because we've learned in practice, over-zoning has been a problem in the sense of having way too many defined zones. It gets confusing. These overlays allow us to say, the basis of this will be this zoning, but this particular area has needs or possibilities that we should change certain aspects on top of the zoning that allow things to move in the way that we want to for a city. So that's kind of another way to look at it.
Yeah.
There's my planning commission.
Yeah.
Chatter.
No, but it's really helpful, and I think sometimes the zoning stuff can be
baffling.
Yes. So if you're interested in that, just a plug to get on planning commission.
I didn't even mean to do that. Yeah. Well done.
All right. So now we're on the council meeting. We started with community comments and council comments. So I just want to go through a few of these because we had some really good comments. First of all, we had a comment from a community member asking us to up our sidewalk shoveling.
And not the city so much as maybe, and this might fall into that enforcement side, but don't worry, we're actually not talking about residential. It was brought to our attention that there were certain businesses that may not be shoveling in a timely fashion, and I believe that resident was referring to just, mobility issues. He mentioned scooters, things like that. And so we're going to definitely take a look at that. I think staff was taking like rapid fire notes about some specifics that were mentioned. But in general, we're always here if you have an issue, if there is a business by you that is not pulling their weight, and I understand it's tough because it's been a heck of a year, don't hesitate to let us know. I mean, we want to keep the sidewalks, and we really want to hold our business owners to a very high standard of keeping those sidewalks clean. And most everybody does, and even in these cases, I think probably there's a couple where there's a hiccup in some sort of situation that can be remedied easily. We're not like going and trying to charge them thousands of dollars or anything, but we have no interest in having anything where there's an unclear sidewalk in front of a business in our city.
No,
point blank. So
it's an enormous problem when that happens, not only for people who are just walking around, but also we have a lot of people who use mobility devices, and it can make it literally impossible for them to get around the city.
And so, speaking from the business community, we don't want to be on the other side where you're on one side, we're on the other side, and you start to not come to our business because you can't safely get there. So the business community is also, it's not just a city thing. The business community is also very, very behind, and most of us do a really excellent job. And I think that, a couple little nudges in this direction, but we're happy to do the nudging. We want to do that, so perfect.
So then council comments. I just want to shout out Pat Arman, who's been doing a great job of lifting up donations to the city. And thank you to everyone who donated to the city. It really makes an enormous difference in our ability to provide great services to our community. He's actually leading a litter cleanup on April 22nd. So if you're interested in that, reach out to Pat Arman. Wentworth Library is holding a parade workshop. So if you're interested in being in the parade for Explore West St. Paul Days this summer, there is a parade workshop March 16th at 6:30. And then there's a Fix It clinic too, to learn how to fix things around your house, March 18th from 1 to 4. So that's this Sunday. And then we had a West St. Paul Day at the Capitol. Lisa Angsarn and Wendy Berry and our city manager, Nate Burkett, all went down and had great meetings with our local representatives. We are fortunate to be represented to actually have been split, and so now we have more representation at the Capitol, which is phenomenal. And so they met with Maria Perez-Vega, Sandy Pappas, Senator Matt Klein, Senator Sandy Pappas, and Representative Mary Frances Clarity. And then actually, I also attended the bonding hearing the other day and was really grateful to Senator Sandy Pappas for carrying our bonding bill. So we're hopeful that we're going to get lift station funding for our last lift station, which is a big deal for our city. This is one of those things that cities have to deal with, and we've talked about it before. Our lift stations keep sewage from backing up into our houses. It's a very big deal. So thanks to Senator Pappas for that.
And we also, I kind of gave a shout out to staff for doing the strategic planning session we just did. And just personally, and we also want to thank Joe Atkins, our county commissioner, for coming. That was great. And our city attorney, who didn't have to be there technically because she's not staff, but she chose to come. And there was, I came out of it, and I've done these multiple times, really feeling like it was one of the most ambitious and dialed in and result-oriented things we've done. And strategic planning is basically, what are we going to do in the next 2 years? And I feel like we came out of this one without a lot of saying things that people want to hear, and a lot of really actual measurable goals. And that'll come out, they have to synthesize it obviously, but that'll come out, it'll be available to the public. And I think people are really gonna like what they see. And it isn't just air quotes, we tried. It's going to actually have measures so we can tell if we're successful, tell if we fell behind. In review, it was mentioned that we actually had made a lot of progress and we're hitting the marks that we had in our last strategic planning, which is great to see. And I hope we are even further along as we hit the next one. So.
And I just want to say that when we went through the strategic planning process, we determined that, so equity has been a huge issue in our city, but we recommitted to the idea of equity being the umbrella through which we viewed everything in the city, and something that we then created very specific measurable outcomes to achieve. So you can go and see them, but they are concrete numbers. We are going to, in the next 2 years, do this. And so we'll be able to tell if we hit our goals in the next 2 years. Thompson County Park is having an open house about the bike trail.
Butler, I believe?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Thanks to
I don't remember what that was, but it's in the things.
It's in there, water main work in Ward 1. Councilmember Eastman also talked about this, and yes, I don't remember the details, but it's coming up.
Oh, and another thing is I was on Talk About How Good Staff Is, which I'm always on, but I was particularly on it today. I did have a specific shout out for our grant coordinator, who's a relatively recent position we established, who got money for the things that Pat had talked about, the donation. The police office is doing a fishing event for at-risk youth, and we would not be able to do that if it wasn't for having a grant writer that went out and I believe got $2,100. That grant writing position, I cannot tell you how important that is and how appreciative I am that A, that we have it, and B, we have somebody really good in it. That position pays for itself 10 times over potentially, and that affects literally your taxes, everything. We will do things we couldn't do otherwise, or that we would have to put a bunch more money into. Grant writer is a key thing, and I'm so glad that we are supporting that at the city right now. It's really important.
And her name is Sarah Haugen.
Did I not mention her name?
So if you happen to come by City Hall and you see Sarah, say hi.
Give her a high five.
Tell her give her a high five. Tell her she's doing a great job, and we appreciate her a lot. Last thing, Summer Parks registration is open.
Yep, and I think now they're looking for people on the staffing side for that. I think was the other thing that was brought up.
Yeah, and so you have to be 14 or older, but 14-year-olds are eligible to apply to be Summer Park staff, and so it's
as our 94-year-olds.
As our 94-year-olds,
everybody up from there. So,
yes. Yeah. It's a great job, a really good opportunity to connect with folks in our community and be part of the amazing work that we're doing here. All right, so now that we got through council comments, that was a lot.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Really good stuff. So we had our final reading. So we're on public hearings. We had our final reading on an ordinance on stormwater management, which we've talked about in previous videos. Basically just took it out of zoning because it doesn't belong in zoning. And Ross, our city engineer, did a great presentation, which he's actually done a couple of times, about why it doesn't make sense to have that in zoning.
Yep, and we made it uniform for the whole city, rather than having Thompson, the Thompson watershed area, I think that's what it's called, which would have a different rule about disruption and wastewater management. And the argument is, why would that not be universal for the city? So that's what we did. So it's now, and it's a higher standard that now the whole city's held to. I'll go back on this because I know that people get worried about this. This does not mean that if you are doing something in your yard, you are going, you want to have a garden, you have to do wastewater management. Really what it's talking about is large disruption. It's a half acre of disruption. So even if most of us are not on half acre residential plots, even if you're on an acre large plot, unless you're literally disrupting half of your lot, you still are fine. So it's really focused on business side, industrial, that large residential projects. So don't freak out that you have to call the city because you want to put in a rain garden. You're okay.
You're cool. Yeah. Okay, then I'm gonna pull together these two THC ordinances. Now we've talked about these a lot. In fact, I just went through my notes this week and found that I think I found 6 different times that we had talked about this in council meetings and over the last year. So
yeah.
I wouldn't want to say at least, but I found 6 places in my notes where I talked about it a little bit. What more can I say about it? So we passed an ordinance tonight. We had a final reading and we passed the ordinance that specialty that we will have. So anyone who's selling less than 10% of their business is THC products.
Is a standard license.
Can get a standard license. And any retailer is eligible to do this. By the way, all of this could basically change when the state comes down with its rules. So
if and when.
If and when. So this is going to continue to be it's going to be an ongoing conversation for.
We have a minor break. I would say at this point we're probably nothing much is changing for a few months to a year, depending on how things go at the legislature. But the city can take a little 30 bit of a breather, maybe. Wouldn't be bad.
We've been talking about this a lot. Then we have our specialty licenses. Do you want to talk about the?
Yeah, and so a specialty license is triggered if you're doing over 10% of your sales or over 10% of your sales floor is dedicated to specifically these THC products, this 5 milligram, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't think we need to go through it for the umpteenth time. I think the important thing, and I talked about that, if you're really curious to see my feelings, you can watch the thing. It's really important to understand that what we are doing, and the mayor mentioned this too, is we are trying to create a balance where we have people on all sides of this issue. Some people that want much more control, some people want much less control. And what we have to find is a reasonable, policy-based way to determine what meets the best needs of the city in the best way.
And that we're allowed to do.
And that's why we've spent so much time on this. And it's not just, it's also been in planning multiple times because zoning has to go through planning. So it's tons of time and city discussion, whatever. And the reason it's discussed so much is that you are working towards a very complicated issue and you're trying to find what is the cleanest, best, most representative of the varying perspectives and just find something solid that you can put on the table. I think we did that. I think that's why we finally got to a final reading. That's the process of government. You tweak and you turn and you move and you change and you listen to input, and we even changed one thing tonight at the table, removing some possession criminality for under 21 that I think was the right choice to not have that be, to be added on.
Yeah, we don't want to add to that.
Exactly. And so I feel good about what we did. Obviously, if you really want to dig in, you've got many, 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 many televised meetings and videos from us and agendas to go through. But I walked away tonight feeling like we've done what we've been trying to do, and we're finally hit the finish line. I think we hit the finish line, and everybody walked away feeling like we're at the right spot at the council table, and that's really the goal.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's that.
Yeah. The last thing was an ordinance rezoning property to R3 for townhome residential, which honestly is not that exciting.
We've talked about this before. It's basically cleaning up. We used to have this big gulf between, I believe it was 1 to 6 or 6 to 40. So basically you had pretty much single family home development and then large scale apartment development, which lumped townhome development, the 7 to, I'm forgetting because I've talked about it so much. We'll call it 7 to 13. The top number is probably wrong. But we actually need all three of those. I was talking about how you want simplified zoning. There are times where simplified zoning leaves you in a weird spot too. And if you have townhomes and large apartments in the same bucket, if you will, you're not really doing the right thing with zoning because they're very different. They have different needs. They have different things that we have to address with the townhome. Obviously, we get into the roads that are within the townhome thing. Well, that doesn't matter if it's an apartment, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just a cleanup thing. Goes along with our comp plan better, makes our zoning cleaner. It's somewhat administrative, but it's the sort of administrative stuff that if you don't take care of it, and again, thanks to staff for spotting this and getting it in front of people. If you don't take care of it, eventually it's going to come back and go, oh, we don't have a tool that we could use. And now we have that tool.
Now we have a tool. That was it.
That's it.
I said that it was going to be a longer video because we weren't holding it like this, and now it kind of was.
Yeah, it's about the same as it always is.
Good to see all of you.
Thank you for your patience every time we
much.
do this, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Talk to you in a couple weeks.
Bye.